So let me ask you a question. How much is a pristine forest worth? Or, clean air? What about just the simple beauty of an untouched landscape? We throw around the word priceless for these things, right? But what happens when we actually have to choose between preserving them and, say, developing them for economic gain? Well, it turns out economists have a really fascinating way of trying to tackle this very problem.
Okay, picture this. A developer wants to build a huge new tourist resort right in the middle of a beautiful, untouched wilderness area. Now, on one hand, you've got the promise of new jobs, economic growth, all good stuff. But on the other, you're looking at the loss of wildlife habitat, natural beauty, maybe clean water. How on earth do we make a rational decision here? And this isn't just some classroom hypothetical. It's a real-world dilemma that policymakers face all the time. And that, right there, brings us to the core of what we're talking about today, what I'm calling the priceless dilemma. The real challenge isn't just saying, oh yeah, nature is valuable. Of course it is. The hard part is figuring out how to compare its value against, well, cold, hard cash. So you've got these two sides. On one, you have the private return. This is the stuff that's super easy to measure in dollars and cents. Resort profits, wages from new jobs. It shows up neatly on a balance sheet. But then you have the other side, the social return. This is the value of that wildlife habitat, the clean air that forest produces, its beauty. These things don't come with a price tag, but we all know they are incredibly valuable to society. So the big question is, how do you even begin to compare the two?
To try and solve this, economists have developed a framework, a way to try and put a social price tag on nature. It's really all about making the invisible visible.
And it's called social cost-benefit analysis. Now, this is not your standard business spreadsheet. Its entire purpose is to correct for what economists call market failures. That's just a fancy term for when the price of something, say gasoline, doesn't actually include its full cost to society, like the cost of air pollution. This analysis tries to value all the impacts, both the good and the bad, in monetary terms.
And here's the crucial point. The goal is not to sell nature to the highest bidder, not at all. It's to make sure that when these huge decisions are being made, the value of those environmental services, the clean air, the wildlife, the recreation, has a formal seat at the table, right alongside all the other economic costs and benefits.
Okay, so how do you actually calculate these values? It all comes down to a surprisingly simple, yet really powerful idea. You ask people what they're willing to pay. And this brings us to our first key concept, willingness to pay, or WTP for short. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the absolute maximum amount of money you would be willing to give up to get an environmental improvement, like, say, protecting that forest from being developed. Now, the flip side of this is something called willingness to accept, or WTA. This is the minimum amount of money someone would have to pay you to make you okay with a loss in environmental quality. Like, what's the least amount of money you'd accept as compensation for a new polluting factory in your town? But here is the critical difference, and it's a really profound one. Your willingness to pay is always, always limited by your bank account. You literally can't pay more than you have. Your willingness to accept, though, it has no such limit. I mean, you could theoretically demand an infinite amount of money to accept the destruction of something you truly hold dear. It's a subtle but hugely important distinction. Okay, so that's the theory. But how do economists actually measure this stuff in the real world? It's not like they can just go online and look up the price of a clean river. They have to ask people directly, and they use some pretty clever methods to do it. The main tool in the toolbox for this is called Contingent Valuation, or CV. Basically, it's a very carefully designed survey where researchers ask people a series of hypothetical questions to figure out the value they place on things that aren't sold in a marketplace, like the mere existence of an old-growth forest. And this is really why CV is so powerful. It can capture not just use values, that's the value you get from actually visiting a park or hiking a trail, but it can also capture non-use values. This is the value that someone living on the other side of the planet might place on simply knowing that the Amazon rainforest exists, even if they never ever plan to visit. That's something that other economic methods just can't get at. It's a huge advantage of this survey approach. So let's get practical for a second. What does one of these contingent valuation studies actually look like? Well, it's not just a simple poll. It's a very structured multi-step process. A proper study follows 6 key steps. First, you have to carefully design the survey itself.
Then you choose how you're going to ask people. Is it by mail, phone, in person? After that, you've got to sample the right population and then analyze all the data you get back. Finally, you scale up the results to estimate a total value, and then you step back and evaluate how the whole exercise went. Now, when they're designing these surveys, the first few questions usually aren't even about money. As this quote from the source material explains, they're about your attitudes. They'll ask things like how concerned you are about environmental issues, and they do this to make sure that when you later give a dollar value, it's actually consistent with your stated beliefs. It just makes sense, right? Someone who says they're very concerned should be willing to pay more.
Next up, the survey has to present a realistic payment vehicle. This is just the hypothetical way you would pay. To make the whole scenario feel believable, it's often framed as something like a small increase in your taxes or maybe your water bill. It has to be plausible. Otherwise, people just won't take the question seriously.
Then we get to the big question, how much? Now, there are a few ways to ask. You could just ask an open-ended question, but that can be tricky. You could try a little bidding game or show people a payment card with different options. But today, one method is really considered the most reliable. And that's the referendum method. It's widely seen as the gold standard. Why? Well, because it mirrors a real-life choice that we're all familiar with, voting. It just feels more realistic, and it's frankly easier for people to give an honest yes or no answer. And here's what that looks like in practice. A survey might ask a simple yes or no question. Would you be willing to pay $30 annually in higher taxes to fund a program for old-growth forest protection? Now, here's the clever part. Different people in the survey get different dollar amounts. Some are asked about $10, others maybe $100. And by analyzing the pattern of all those yes and no answers, researchers can statistically figure out the average willingness to pay for the whole population. So, after all this complex economic theory and all these statistical gymnastics, what's the bottom line? Why does any of this actually matter? I want to be really clear on this point. This whole process isn't about putting a price tag on a forest so it can be sold off. It's actually the exact opposite. It's about demonstrating its economic value so that it isn't treated as if it's worth zero, which is exactly what happens when its benefits are ignored in a traditional analysis. It's about making sure its value is finally counted. So let's just quickly bring it all together. We start with that big framework, social cost-benefit analysis, which forces us to count what the market ignores. The value we're trying to count is based on that core idea, what people are willing to pay. And the most common tool we have to actually go out and ask them is the Contingent Valuation survey. In the end, economists have given us a set of pretty sophisticated, if not perfect, tools to assign monetary value to the environment. They've provided a way to translate our deep appreciation for nature into the language of policy and finance. So now that we have these tools, the real question isn't a technical one anymore, it's a political one. Will we actually have the will to use them?